Hi, this is Rahman Sheikh. Welcome to Fortnightly Railway Transportation Systems Podcast. I am the host and railway systems specialist working in this industry for 24 years and counting. This podcast is primarily focused on railway experts who have vast amount of experience and contributed greatly to this amazing industry. This is not a technical seminar but focuses on feel good stories, individual journeys, their success and failures, motivating younger generation to kickstart their career in railways and creating a sense of pride for the railway people who devoted their lives on the most environment friendly public transportation. Our guest for this fortnight, Director and Divisional Manager Systems Engineering and Safety Assurance at Arch Artifex, overseeing a portfolio of multi-million dollar engagements and leading a dedicated team across multiple states. Andy Petrie has worked in major project and operational roles, gaining extensive knowledge in systems, assets, and transport operations. He has contributed significantly to various high hazard industries, including civil construction, nuclear, oil and gas, aviation, and more, particularly in the analysis of risk to the public to inform evidence based decision making. In addition to his current role, Andy has impressive track record, having held key positions in renowned organizations such as Transport for New South Wales, Network Rail Consulting, Transport for London, Tube Lines, and more, contributing significantly to the safety and assurance in the rail and transportation industry. Hi, Andy. Welcome to Railway Transportation Systems Podcast.
Hi, glad to be here.
Andy, let's start with my first generic question. So, because you're SESA, I'll ask on that. Can you tell us more about your background and the pivotal moments that led you to a career in safety assurance and infrastructure management?
I think, like a lot of people, it's a series of accidents that got me to where I am today. I started my original studies in chemical engineering back in the early 90s. As part of that, I did a year in industry with ICI and did some hazard and operability studies at the time. When I finished my initial degree, I decided I wanted to go into the environment and do a follow-up master's degree in environmental management and clean technology. At the very end of that course, and just when we'd finished handing in our reports, there was a job posted on the wall that a consultancy was looking for someone to go and work in Seoul to do hazard secretaries for a new oil refinery that was being built. So I applied for that, and a week later I'd moved to Korea for 6 weeks and was doing HAZOPs. So when I got back to the UK, I stayed in the oil and gas industry and worked for a few consultants doing risk assessments, slowly moving out of oil and gas and looking at transport things, as I say, nuclear, some aviation, and moving into rail. And again, in another sliding door moment in 2003, I got offered a job to move to London and work for one of the London Underground companies. So I jumped at that and moved down to London, spent several years working on the London Overground at the time. A few years later, it was being built. Then the Docklands Light Railway, a small people mover in East London. It moves a massive amount of people. And while we were there, we were doing the Olympic Games as well, which was really fascinating to be part of that. And another sliding doors moment after that, I got an opportunity in 2013 to come move to Australia with Network Rail Consulting to work on the ISA gig. And I packed up and moved to Australia there again. And here we are just over 10 years later, working for Arch Artifex, doing safety assurance in the railway again. So yeah, just a series of fortunate accidents got me to where I am today.
Wow, what a career. Chemical engineering, that's where I got stuck up. The toughest engineering is chemical engineering, the most toughest course. I think you're quite academic, and coming from there into safety assurance, quite a drastic change in the career from chemical engineering to safety assurance. Now let's move to my second question. How do you see the role of safety assurance evolving in the context of the ever-changing infrastructure landscape?
I think infrastructure right now in Australia is evolving. We have moved away from just the railway focus that we had a few years ago, and we're looking at new technology and new infrastructure such as the renewable zones, the res zones, and future infrastructure, smart roads, smart highways, and smart technology. So systems assurance has to move with that. And I think it's probably at a point now where we need to really focus on systems assurance and safety assurance and have a look at it again. There's an absolute need for it in high hazard industries. As we say, coming from chemical engineering and those areas, it's so important to do safety assurance. But I think we've got to a bit of a point now where applying the same amount of effort we should for high hazard industries to low hazard industries in some areas, in some sectors. So we're not necessarily providing the value to industry that safety assurance should have. And that's different in every organization. It's particularly different in every state as well. So when I look at work down in Melbourne and up in Brisbane and other parts of Australia, there's a different approach. And that's not good because, the law's the same, physics are the same, gravity is the same, safety assurance should be the same. But what I see is it's moving apart and diverging rather than coming together. So I think we're at a critical point now where we need to really focus safety assurance as what it was intended to be and not let it move away.
Yeah, I do agree. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. Is there any work you're doing in the background to bring that together in all states?
You've probably seen my post on LinkedIn, actually. I mean, that's probably where a lot of people engage with me from that side, sort of putting out there my views on how things should work. Some of it is fact-based, some of it is interpretation of legislation, some of it's just my own views, and you'll see we're getting a huge amount of feedback from people. There's a lot of people who support it and very much want to drive that message both in the private sector and industry. But again, you can go through the comments and see that I'm annoying a lot of people, actually pointing out that what they're doing is not necessarily adding value for the client, and it's their job, but they get defensive about it. So we have to have that, we call it a coalition of the willing, of people who want to try and make that change for the better. So yeah.
You are the whistleblower.
Certainly blow the whistle.
I wish you write a paper for Engineers Australia. And moving to my next question, Andy, you have worked in both private and public sectors. How do these experiences differ in terms of safety assurance challenges?
I think it's important to note that people in both the private and public sectors both want to do the right thing. There's no one out there trying to mess it around or cut corners or cut costs. It's just that people have different priorities of what they're working to. When you're working in the public sector, you don't necessarily have the same time and budget constraints that the private sector do. There's very tight contracts, late changes, things flying at you all around, and people are trying to get the right thing done to a level that's suitable and fit for purpose. And I don't think that's often recognized. I mean, when I left transport and went to the private industry, I was actually quite surprised by the amount of change and flack that gets thrown at the safety assurance people in those teams trying to deliver, as opposed to what I thought happened when I was obviously on the client teams on the other side. And then you have the flip side where, again, within the clients, there's not that budget constraint, and they can be more looking forward and looking to the future. And you tend to get a lot of initiatives coming out and let's make some changes and make things better. And in some cases, it's gold plating, but there's a view that they want things to be done in a certain way. But the impact of those things as they cascade down the industry just result in a massive amount of costs and delays to projects that don't really add any value to that fundamental safety assurance. And it's about recognizing that when you try to make a change in the industry as a client or one of those government organizations, the impact is way bigger than you think and expect it to be when you're trying to make those things. So it's interesting. And you get a bit of conflict. I mean, naturally, there's conflict in delivery. And for some reason, I see a little bit of blame on the safety assurance people trying to cut corners. Oh, we want it done this way, we want it done that way. And every time I look into this, there's nothing happening that's wrong. People have their views of how they want things done, but they've not specified that in the contract. Here's a hazard log. Oh, I wanted it in a different format. Well, you should have asked for it in a different format. That's going to cost us a lot of time and effort and money to go back in a different format. And most of the things that I see when you look into them are basically badly written contracts and poor procurement processes that are the cause of the issues. But when you actually get down to the symptoms at the end of the life cycle, that's where the problems occur and the safety assurance people get a bad name. So as I say, I think both parties try to do the right thing, and it's often interpretation and understanding their roles that's the issue, not actually the ability to do the safety the right way.
Wow, great insights, Andy. Thanks for sharing that. Can you also share some real-world examples of identifying and eliminating efforts that added cost but no value to a project while still achieving the desired outcome?
The biggest one for me is comments. People raising comments on other people's documents. It's amazing when you give someone a document to read and comment on, they will raise a comment even if there's nothing that they need to do. And sometimes I'm not sure if it's that they feel they should raise comments or they feel they're being paid. And the most difficult thing for people to do is actually review the document and say, you know what, that's fine. I don't need to raise a comment. But when you raise a comment, you then enter this cycle of that comment needing to be addressed and closed out. We make a bit of a joke that, it costs $50 to raise a comment and $500 to close a comment out. Sometimes that's $5,000 to close that comment out by the time it's been through reviews and meetings and work and those kind of things. So my major bugbear is people raising unnecessary comments. And this is sometimes done in a strange way, because the way we set up contracts with suppliers is that we actually incentivize them to raise contracts. So if you're paying someone by the hour, they will review a document, they will raise comments, and then there's a cash flow that goes on while these comments are closed out. One of my friends, Jeremy, calls it cash for comments. And again, it's really difficult. So what I say to people, and I said this when I was in government as well, is that when you're raising comments, make sure they're critical comments that you want closed out. Ask yourself those three tests. So what? So what am I doing by raising this comment? What do I expect someone to do with this comment? If it's a typo, why am I raising a comment on a typo? It's just wasting people's time and money to close these things out. And again, what happens if they don't address this comment? In most cases, nothing. By raising that comment, you've started this cycle of comment reviews. One of the things that we've done on the ISA job I'm working at the moment is where we raise comments, we have category 1, which is critical, category 2, which is important, and category 3. But what we do when we raise a category 3 is once they've acknowledged it, we close it out, because we don't want them to spend time and money following this up. They can put it on a to-do list and maybe when they update the document, but simple things like comment management is possibly the biggest thing that would save the most money for industry from a safety issue.
And time. What a great answer, because even in the project I work on, what we do is we have categorization, observations, and minor, which could be a typo error or could be something which is non-functional impact. So we don't stop the project or the project going ahead, but there would be a comment that you need to address this, but it's not costing time and it's not blocking the people. I think that's a great observation and great insights to share to the public on this platform. Andy, thanks for bringing that up.
Within some projects, and again, depends who the client team is, it's important that you can have someone who can go through the comments and say, no, they're not necessary. Yeah. Thank you, but we're only passing these 5 comments on to our supplier because they're the important ones. And actually having someone empowered to go through comments and say, yes, no, is a big step forward. And I always encourage organizations to do that.
Yeah, I do agree that it's the right way to move forward and bring value for the project. Moving forward, what are some key principles you apply to develop and deliver fit for purpose processes that are simple and efficient?
I think I've developed a few catchphrases over the last few years in Australia. So again, with the previous question, I said the so what test. Why are we doing this? What difference does it make? So that's a very important one, and I often get people to raise that. Another one is my good enough is good enough. Safety is a pass or fail. Once you've demonstrated it's safe, anything going beyond that is really just wasted effort. The legislation says so far as is reasonably practical. Once you've demonstrated so far, why do you keep spending effort going beyond that? It adds no value. So get to a point where it's good enough. Doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah, we know we could gold plate, we could spend more money, but actually got to a point where the document is fit for purpose. We've demonstrated safety, we've demonstrated our assurance commitments are met. That's fine. Let's move on and do something else. It is one of mine. I always tell people and my staff, my 20-page rule for documents is another one. You can't write a document in 20 pages. You shouldn't be writing that document for the most part. Now, I know that's 20 pages of content and not the 15 pages of introduction and appendices that some companies make you put, but you can't put 20 pages of good content in a document. Some safety cases I've seen over the last few years for not massively major projects, 350 pages long. And, that's just insane. You can't work out what the safety argument is in there. It's impossible. So just by actually focusing on getting some core content, writing simple things, referencing things out, I do it once, do it properly is another one of my catchphrases. If you've done it once somewhere, that's fine. Stop repeating the same information in 5 different documents. And then you get into a document control issue where things are always out of date. So what I encourage people to do, is really be brutal sometimes. We just got to stop doing this. There's no benefit in it. And sometimes that annoys people, especially on some of our projects where you've come in halfway through. A lot of our jobs that other clients have had to be moved off and we've come on. And when you go in there and you explain that actually there's been so much wasted effort, the only thing to do, and there's a couple of major projects I've done this on, is literally scrap every single piece of safety assurance that's been done over the previous 2 years and start again, because there's no way you can look at the things that have been. And again, just be persistent and drive this keep it simple message at all times. There is a time and place for complexity. Know when it is and add the complexity when it's needed, but keep it simple at all of the times is absolutely.
What I hear is use common sense, use simple common sense, and this is
unfortunately common sense is not very common.
Yeah, even I observed that there are a couple of documents where people just bring it everything, even for example, the simple abbreviations. There are hundreds of abbreviations and literally even 10 of them are not used in the whole document, and it's in every single document. They just copy paste. Such things really need to be addressed. And in the recent review, I have read one document which do not have a purpose, and I do not know why I'm reading this or what is the purpose of me reviewing this. I had no idea about that. So some documents are really like that. People really need to take your advice and put in action. Thanks for bringing that, Andy. And I'll move to my next question. I read a short intro of yours, but what I observed is throughout your career, you have been involved in a wide range of high hazard industries. Can you share a particularly challenging project or situation that required your expertise in risk analysis and decision making?
The very start of my career, as I say, when I finished that first hazards studying career, was to start with consultancies, and we were doing risk assessments, but not simple matrix risk assessments, quantified risk assessments where you look at hazard, you look at the failure data, you make assumptions based on engineering judgment, you look at accident data, and you develop a very complicated set of safety risk modeling tools that go with it. And some of those then have consequence assessments, such as the release of toxic gases, release of nuclear material, and you can actually understand the risk over a geographic area. So I did a few of those, and that was really how I started my career. One of those, and it's a funny story, I'll talk about it. It was a combined heat and power plant and desalination plant that was being built in Doha in Qatar. And this is probably about 2002, 2003, I was working on this project. It was remote, so we didn't have teams in those days. We got sent a load of design drawings and a briefing, and we had to go through and effectively model most of that plant in a software tool. And that's obviously looking at things like gas explosions and fires if something went wrong as part of the plan. So I did the modeling, did that, sent it back to Doha, had lots of interactions, and at the end of the day we had a pretty good map of where the hazards were on this site, and in some cases they had some office buildings and a prayer room in some very high hazard areas, so we made the recommendation to move and relocate those buildings away to safer places. It was just about the time when I completed that I left and went into the railway shortly afterwards, so I never knew what happened to it. And a few weeks ago when I was flying to the UK, I was flying out of Doha airport. It was a really bright sunny morning about 7 o'clock, and I actually noticed out the window the last refinery, and I took my phone and took a photo out the window, and I was able to zoom in and see the site that I'd been modeling 20 years ago, and actually the office buildings had all been moved out of the site to another area. So it took 20 years on that particular occasion, but I did actually see the output of some work I did in the early 2000s.
Wow.
And that quantified risk approach it's really, really powerful and used a lot in the UK and Europe, not so much over here, but we've used it at Transport for New South Wales on a couple of occasions to do risk assessments and remove massive amounts of scope from projects. We removed 80k worth of fire upgrades from a project once just by doing modelling based on some models from the UK, and it's really powerful to do that.
Wow, great situation and great example, Andy. Thanks for bringing that up. Just a follow-up question. You said there were hazards in various places, such as even in the prayer rooms. Can you elaborate that?
Within the site, you model where the high pressure gas mains are and where the reactors are and those kind of things. And then you have data of the frequency of failure of these events. So you know that there's really two main hazard scenarios. One's an explosion. So you can model contours from the explosion, from the blast pressure goes out from a point. And in this case, one explosion would have set off a cascade of other explosions. So we could model the risk contours around those. And the other was if there was a leak in the gas main, you effectively get a high pressure gas torch blowing out of that main until all the valves are shut down. So it'd be effectively like having an office block in front of a large welding torch. So by looking at those contours, you can see these are the high likelihood areas, these are the lower likelihood areas. So stay in the lower likelihood areas was the way that we did that. Yeah.
Wow, what a great analysis, Andy. That's the reason you are a chartered safety professional and also a chartered engineer. What do these certifications mean for your work and the industry?
Chartered in the industry is really important to me. When I talk about safety assurance, I always talk about the two fundamentals of any safety assurance. Indeed, any assurance is having competent people. If you've got a competent engineer following approved engineering processes, you're going to have a pretty good product at the end of the day, and the amount of assurance you need to do is much less than if you have people who aren't competent. And what chartership does, it sort of makes a statement that you've been assessed as competent as an engineer. Now, you become chartered in your specific area, so whether it's chemical, civil, or whatever you do, so you have a very specific narrow field from your profession, but actually the engineering discipline as a whole, the ability to look at the big picture, make informed decisions, look at the societal issues around the bigger picture of making smart decisions and following processes. So it just basically means it's effectively your first step on any career, any job is we want a chartered engineer. If you look into Europe, being a chartered engineer, if you're about 10 years in your career and you're looking for a job, chartered engineer is a requirement on every job description because it's really established. I don't think in Australia Australia, it's established quite the same. And with Engineers Australia being a much younger institution than the European engineering institutions, it's slowly getting there, and some industries are adopting it. But I think we need to see over the next few years chartered engineer being a requirement for any job that's a senior level or above from an engineering perspective. It's just the bare minimum of what we should be expecting as an industry.
Yeah, I do agree with your analysis and with your advice. I think we should take it further. So far, we discussed about qualifications and some of the safety scenarios and also the importance of being a chartered. Now, with all this, could you highlight some of your notable achievements in managing complex rail systems and operations, particularly in the context of ensuring public safety?
Of all my examples, there's one I always go to, and it's the East London Line project that I worked on as part of the London Overgrounds. What they were doing, we took an old London Underground line, which was called the East London Line, and we basically ripped everything out. We connected that line to the main line network on the north and south of London, which meant a new depot, a new maintenance facility, new operations control, new stations, new viaducts, and a whole heap of things around there. And the most proud thing from my career to this day is being on the first passenger train that went through the tunnel when it opened. And I think Boris Johnson at the time was on the front train. He was the mayor of London, but we weren't important enough to be down that end of the train when it happened. So actually having a city changing project like that was fantastic. And because I was working for the client team at Transport for London, I think, again, it's still one of the best managed projects I've ever been on. It's where I learned all about systems engineering. So we had a fantastic systems engineering team. It's where I saw a GSN used properly for the first time, and possibly one of the only times I've seen a GSN used properly, and for developing a safety and engineering assurance case based on a series of goals being met. To this day, it's still the best thing I've seen. And we were doing the safety assurance, the hazard in the train and the rolling stock. As well as the new assets we were building, we were actually going through what was called the Thames Tunnel. And the Thames Tunnel was the first ever tunnel built under a navigable waterway in the world, started by Mark Brunel and finished by Isambard Kingdom Brunel. And they ran a train through it eventually. So we're working on these assets that are some of the oldest civil engineering assets in the world, but upgrading them for a new modern rolling stock and railway operation. So one of the things we did in the project, we introduced the first walk-through carriage for a railway in the UK, and obviously we've got those on London Underground. Sydney Metro's got them. It's just become the normal, but this is the first time they're being used. So we had to do fire modelling with the fire brigade to say why we're taking out the intercar barriers, and it was novel at the time. And because we were going through this tunnel that was very narrow and very small, we couldn't evacuate out of the side doors, so we had to evacuate out of the end of the train for this part of the tunnel. So there's a whole heap of fire risks that we had to work through, and you can't put a walkway in the old tunnel. We could barely put a fire main in there. But what I found is that by working with the people from London Underground and the London Fire Brigade, we actually had really proactive discussions about how to manage the risk in a smart and sensible way. Some of you may not know, but back in 1987, there was a massive fire on London Underground where 31 people died at King's Cross. And because of that, fire safety is so important on London Underground and for London Fire Brigade. But for these people who were there and was part of that at the time to be able to come through and say, actually, this is a good solution we can all work with. We don't have to stick with that absolute compliance to standards. This is value for money, and we can work within the constraints we get. So that project A was great, and B, the way that all the stakeholders came together to find good solutions rather than sticking their line in the sand and saying, thou shalt not pass, this is not safe. The standard doesn't say so.
Wow, what an example. Great story. I think this is what you bring value to the projects, Andy. You got such a large amount of experience, especially in the safety, and you have also worked globally as well. So you have worked internationally. How do safety and assurances processes vary across different regions and countries? I think within state we touched it, but how about different countries?
I think different countries and different regions, absolutely. The main for me is coming from the UK and Europe, and we have some very good safety processes over there. And one of the things when you come to Australia, you get the general, don't come over here telling us how great you are from the UK, we know how to do it. But actually, it's not telling you how great you are, it's telling you how bad we were. There were so many major incidents in the last century, the Windscale nuclear reactor fire, massive chemical incidents such as Flixborough in the UK, Seveso in Italy, that brought in the high hazard regulations that the whole of Europe works. And then so many rail incidents in the UK, it was the anniversary of the Clapham Junction disaster a few weeks ago. The reason that safety assurance is done so well in the UK UK and Europe is because we messed it up so badly and killed a lot of people. So it's bringing that knowledge to the party and being able to say that this is the reason for safety assurance. And the UK and Europe have that risk-based focus. It's SFARP in the UK, it's France has a slightly different version, Germany again, but they all come together and have agreed this common safety methodology where they meet each other's intent. When you look at America, America's very code compliant. This is the code, you comply with it. As long as you comply with the codes, it's fine. And it's a different way of doing it. And I think Australia's got itself in a bit of, certainly in the rail industry, it has at least anyway. So we do have the risk-based legislation approach of so far as is reasonably practicable. And that's what all the infrastructures managers want, and that's what the regulator wants. But in turn, we seem to be in the operational level referring to the American, you must comply with the code, and that's the only way we'll deal with anything ever. So we don't actually have that approach of actually let's take a standard, which is the good practice guide, and let's find the best way to apply it. And sometimes that means actually saying a bit of it's not relevant. I've worked on a few standards committees and written some standards in my time, and standards are basically the best guess of a room full of people that were brought together at a point in time. It's not the 10 Commandments, it's not written in stone, it's possibly out of date, and there's probably new information technology or different ways you can manage the risk. So I think the approach to risk and standard is smarter in the UK. We have the opportunity to do that with the legislative framework you have in Australia, but it is just made so difficult because the compliance with standards just appears to be the only way that some people can get their head around that.
How about in the Middle East? Because you even worked in Middle East. Do they use SAFAP or they use ALARP?
SAFAP and ALARP are the same, so just to avoid that confusion, one's just a word that's the other. But some countries do. What happened in the Middle East that I've seen is at points in time when a country or an emirate has wanted to build a railway, they've just gone and bought some standards and a framework off another organisation. So there's lots of it that looks like Network Rail, but there's bits of it that look like American, bits that look like Canada. So there's a mix over there. And while they have the SAFAR's reasonable practical legislation, I don't think they have the jury like they do in Australia as well. So I'm not entirely sure how that would actually be implemented if there was a prosecution. But the framework is based on that. I'm not sure the legal test that sits behind it would be the same.
Let's go back to your current role, Andy, as a Director of Safety Assurance and Divisional Manager at SESA Director. What are some of the most significant challenges you face in overseeing multi-million-dollar engagements?
So talking on behalf of the jobs you're working on rather than Arch, I think the big one, and I've touched on this a little bit in previous years, is the ultimate client teams that we work for, and they're mostly government organisations in different states, not really understanding their role. I talk about this a lot. Rail safety national law is very prescriptive in what a rail infrastructure manager is, what a designer is, what a supplier is, and what duties go with them. But when you get into delivery, there's a lot of people thinking that I work for the client, I've got to fix that design because it's broken, and start instructing designers or start instructing safety assurance when actually you don't have a role to do that. You can invoke the contract and make changes, but other than that, you've got to really accept assurance. Not always. If you do actually want to step in and adjust the design, that's fine. But you become a designer at that point in time. Some of the rail safety national law duties then sit with you. So you can't just instruct design and walk away and say it's not my risk. So trying to get clients to understand their role, and some of the supply chain as well from that side of it. A big risk aversion from clients. Again, some of the discussions I have about the smallest, most trivial risk that's if you had 1,000 risks on the railway, it'd be 1,000 at the lowest. Because one of the clients has suddenly got in their head that this is a massive risk and it needs to be controlled. So using those frameworks that we talked about earlier about using quantified risk and calculating risk levels, you can apply financial values to those kinds of things. And it's sometimes it's very easy to calculate that a safety risk is at less than $1 a year or less than $50 over the life of the asset. But you'll then have to spend in excess of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 on safety studies to justify that to the client because they just won't believe it. They just won't believe that a competent person has done a risk assessment and it's fine. And again, I think it's a bit of a bugbear, but with some engineering disciplines, an expert's an expert. I wouldn't never go and tell a high voltage electrician that they've sized something wrong. But with safety, everyone's an expert and everyone's got a view. And sometimes it's about saying no to how we deal with things. So I find it's the frustration in getting decisions made, clients instructing things without the accountability of it. Decision by committee. Again, we talked earlier about the comments. You can raise 5 comments, 100 comments, and then the person who's raised the comments has left. So there's no one to close them out. And then you have committees trying to work out what the intent of these decisions were. And it just delays everything and brings in things. And the smallest trivial risks end up taking about 80, 90% of your time. And what happens is the big risks can actually get ignored when that happens. So it can actually get to a point where in trying to overassure something, you're actually negatively impacting safety because everyone's forgetting the big risk over there because we're all dealing with the minutiae over here. So that's possibly where I'd say is my biggest problem.
Well, great answer, Andy. From your current role from Arch Artifex, let's move to a project specific role, independent safety assessor. You are a lead independent safety assessor for the Melbourne Metro Tunnel project and previously for Sydney Metro Northwest. Could you share some insights into these projects, please?
I can't share anything specific about the projects because it's a privileged role, but I'll talk a little bit about ISA as in general. So as you say, I've been the lead ISA for two major projects. As a client at Transport, I engaged the ISA for several major projects, and chairing the CCB at the time, I was a recipient of the ISA. And now in the private sector, I'm actually having to deal with ISAs from the supply chain side. What I find is that there's no real understanding of what an ISA does. People don't understand why it's there or why it's needed, and everyone thinks it needs to be done differently. There's no real guidance. There's two real types of ISA that we have in Australia. One is the European style of ISA, where you're being brought in by a provider, and that's usually a rolling stock provider or a signaling provider or some other highly specified technical solution with a software component, and they're paying you to say their product's safe. So a signaling provider has signaling provider's ISA, and the signaling provider says it's safe, and signaling provider's ISA says it's safe as well. So therefore, they've got a product that's safe, so they can sell it to different people all the time and just look at the changes every time. The Rail Safety National doesn't specify an ISA, but the ONSA have issued a major project guideline which says for major projects they expect that an ISA is engaged, but that's all they say about what an ISA should do. In those engagements, and again, like the one I did on Sydney Metro and the one in Melbourne, my role is to give advice to the decision-making body. So the CCB or the NAC or whoever the body is, what I think, whether the safety process has been followed, and allow them to make a decision based on that behalf. What I find is that those advisory ISAs are sometimes doing the job of a product ISA and saying things are safe and reviewing things line by line across the board. So it's one of these challenges. We really need to understand and define what the role of an ISA is nationally, so that everyone's doing it consistently. There might be changes, there might be better ways of doing it. We should have a consistent approach across all the states and all the major projects. And so, yeah, it's something that adds significant value, but where there's a lot more value could be got out of it.
It does. What a great explanation and what a great overview of ISA. You explained it in less than 2 minutes. Thank you. With your extensive experience, Andy, what trends or innovations do you see on the horizon that will shape the future of safety assurance in infrastructure projects?
This is a tricky one. I think we're at a bit of a tipping point in, say, systems engineering and safety assurance. Over the last few years, again, because of a lot of effort that adds no value, there's been a huge amount of requirement for professionals to come in this area. And because of that, the salaries have gone up significantly. We have a lot of people thinking, oh, I'll be a CESA engineer and coming into the engineer. I did some assurance, or I did a CCB submission. So we've got to a point where there's a lot of people in the industry who haven't yet become competent enough to do the job that they're in. And at the same time, being paid phenomenal salaries, which I was being paid 20 years ago, absolutely, to do jobs. And we've got to a point now in the industry where we need to basically say, stop, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? Let's do this more efficiently. And if we keep going the way we are, it's just going to be a bit of a nightmare. So, I just want to get safety professionals doing the job that's necessary, focusing on high hazards, and when it's a low hazard, for everyone to say, yeah, that's okay, we can manage it with a much lower piece of work. I think across the board, we've lost the accountability for safety in the industry. We've got rid of competent people in decision-making roles across the board and had to fill them with people who aren't yet competent necessarily to do that job. And speaking to some other professionals, again, I won't name anyone, that there's a bit of a feeling in the industry that we're just waiting for the next accident to happen and the next inquiry to come along and fix this. And while that would happen, that's absolutely the last thing that anyone actually wants is an incident, but it may be the only thing that actually drives change. So what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to champion is driving that change before we have the accident, before we have people found to be not doing their role. I don't know if you've seen it, but the Institute of Civil Engineering in the UK did a couple of studies a couple of years ago calling the systems approach to infrastructure delivery. They did an initial one and then up last year where Professor Andrew McNaughton provided some commentary. And one of the lines out there that I call a lot is that the sector needs to adopt leadership models that spread authority and empower highly competent individuals to take key decisions in their areas of a project. And so we need to now find a way where we can say, you're a very experienced engineer, you should be in this role, these are your decisions, you make those decisions, don't be running around committees doing briefing notes and papers. And all the industry clients, and so all the public sector clients in Australia are guilty of that, is decision by committee and decision by briefing note rather than having person who can make a decision on the spot. So yeah, that's where I think we're at a turning point, and we now have an opportunity to change before we get too far. And I just hope that we can bring people on board to do that.
I wish we can bring that on board and take your observations and advices further. It's a great insights, Andy. And lastly, what advice do you have for those looking to pursue a career in safety assurance and infrastructure management based on your wealth of experience and success in the field?
I think a personality has got to be right to do this. I did some executive coaching a few years ago at Transport, and my coach, she picked 4 pens and showed me them and said, "What do you see?" And I said, "I see 3 green pens and 1 blue pen." She said, "Yeah, that's your personality. You spot the difference. Most people just say 4 pens." So I think that's what makes safety assurance good for me. I can look at something and spot something that's wrong as opposed to trying to do things right. So if you have a personality that goes, "Why are we doing this? So what's wrong?" then it's a really good industry to work in. You have the opportunity to learn every day, because what I say is you don't have to know how anything works in this industry. You just have to know how it breaks. So when you have a hazard workshop or you're having a risk assessment, you get to ask the people who know the answer. So if this breaks, what happens? And they will then tell you how it doesn't break and how they've designed it's safe. So over the course of 25 years, I've learned so much about the railway industry. I can have a conversation with any engineer in the business just by them telling me about it. So if you want to learn, it's a great industry. But please don't come just because it's a gravy training. You're going to make money out of it. If you want to come and challenge the processes, challenge the designs, make a difference, and actually provide real value for the client, then do it. Safety assurance is best when it's kept simple, but keeping things simple is really hard. So if you have the dedication to try and find the simple way of doing safety assurance, I'd certainly recommend it as a job and a career profession.
Wow, what a great advice, Andy. To be honest, it was a pleasure talking to you. I really did not know when the time passed. Great stories, great insights. Thank you for joining us, Andy.
No, it's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
I believe everyone listening to this podcast has got something to take away from today's discussion. If you like this podcast, please listen, follow, and share this podcast within your network. If you believe we should be sharing your story or someone within your network, there is a railway leader who should be here sharing his or her contribution to this industry, contact me on railwaytransportationsystems@gmail.com. Thank you for your time today. See you next fortnight. Until then, stay safe and take care of yourself.